Alright, so we're going to take a look at another game here. This is like a Flappy Birds game. I wanted to show you two things with this. First of all is how do we get this gravity feel? And then second of all is how we get the blocks to essentially move through space. Notice too a couple things that the blocks are random widths and random heights, and how far where they get space is a little bit different. When I hit the ground or hit a block, I end up having a game over. So let's take a look at how we're doing this here. Essentially, I'm trying to keep it simple, so I'm using two different blocks, one for the top, one for the bottom, and each of those has two blocks. So I could have something that's randomly creating blocks, creating many blocks, but I'm only going to use 4 blocks total, 2 on top and 2 on the bottom. And I kind of achieved that game feel by varying the widths and heights, and so that each time through they're a little bit different. Once again, using my hero character, and this time I have the space bar as my action trigger, and that's the only thing I really need. I do have the option where you can kind of hold down the space bar for this and you'll actually go up. Most things are similar. I'm going to get to how I created the blocks in a second. Now let's get into the animation timer, and this is where it's a little bit more difficult. Essentially using gravity, but when we use gravity the same way that the Earth would apply it, the game dynamics don't quite work out all that well. So I'm using the same equation, velocity equals 1/2 at squared, but time and what that gravitational constant is and things like that change a little bit. So here you can see the gravitational equation, but time I have as an increment starting at 0 when my animation timer goes, and you see I increment it up by 1/1000th every time. And so I have this gravity pulling down on me. I have, creating a velocity, and my change in y each time is this velocity here. However, if I hit the space bar, that's where I need to change the velocity. And what happens is over time that gravity will pull even more, and so I really need to kind of reset time. So playing with time, playing with velocity, and things like that help me to get something that feels realistic. And again, playing with that gravitational constant. What can happen is, depending on how you play with the time and the velocity and things like that, you can get it to fall faster. You can have the spacebar have less of an effect and things like that. So you can feel free to play with these. But again, check out the equation. Really, the gravitational part is all right in here with some of the constants you see up above. Okay, so once I have gravity set, I need to, that basically controls my icon. I relocate them to a new X, new Y, although the new X is not changing. I think I had this originally set up for other things if I wanted to change the X. So you can see my X delta is 0, and so it doesn't move my guy forward at all. But then I also have this move ceiling and move floor methods, and we'll get to those in a second. And then I also have this check game over method where I pass it the icon, so basically passing it the icon so I can check its position. And if it is game over, I stop my animation and I run my game over scenario. Okay, so that's basically the program. Now let's look at some of the methods. So creating the initial blocks. My top block I rotate it 180 degrees, so it's going to be on the ceiling. I set the height to a random height where I have a minimum and a maximum that I specified at the top. And then I also set the width to 30 to 100. Now I could have used constants like I did for the width, although I found that the width I didn't really need to vary too often. Depending on how complex or how hard I want the game to be, I might want to vary the minimum or the maximum. And then for the top, I relocate that block to the edge of the screen and 0. Now the second block, I don't want it to be right at the same time, so what I actually do is I just put it 300 pixels off the screen, and in time it'll get onto the screen there. So I can still start it and still put it into my scene at the start. I just put it so far off the screen that you don't see it at the start. Same thing now for the ones in the bottom, except the bottom, the only difference is the height, or where I place it. Remember, I'm placing the top left corner, so that goes height minus the block height, so that I can get that off the top corner. And then again, I actually stagger this 350 versus 300 so that the first two, when they come in, aren't right at the same spot. Alright, so let's look at how I move the ceiling and the floor, and these are basically the same for both of them. Now what I'm doing is I'm essentially looking to see if the X position is less than negative width. And what that's basically saying is I don't want to just remove it when it gets to 0. I actually want it to scroll all the way off the screen so that the right hand side gets to 0. And so that's basically saying keep going until that right hand gets off. And when it does, then I would essentially move it all the way back and relocate it back to the start. But before I relocate it back to the start, I actually want to resize it, and so that's resizing it right here, and also give it a new width, and then I relocate it back to the start. Same thing for block 2, although with block 2 what I've done is I've also checked to make sure that the other block is at least 150 into it. If it is not 150 into its next journey, then I basically add 150, so I'm relocating that block off the screen a little ways. And this prevents the two blocks from really stacking up. Now I could put this logic on this one as well, but in general, with it on at least with it on one of them, it keeps the two apart. I don't really need it on the second one as much. Okay, so I'm doing that, finding them, relocating them, and once I relocated them, I'm now just subtracting 4, which is the speed that they're moving across the screen. Now my floor, same exact code. Just going through, looking at moving the blocks off. Now the one difference, of course, is when I'm relocating it, I still have this h minus the block height because I'm putting that in a little bit different spot. Okay, so now I also have my game over, check game over. So now I'm looking at a couple conditions. First of all, I'm looking to see if my icon hit the ground. In the ground, again, it's height minus 16 because the block is 16 pixels wide. Or my hero icon is 16 pixels wide. And then I'm also checking for collision events on each of my different blocks. And then finally, if there is a game over, I'm calling this code here. So again, relatively basic. I didn't use arrays to put my blocks in like I've had for others, since I only had 2 different blocks to check. It wasn't worth the effort to create an array. You could create this game where you had multiple blocks and in different timings kind of coming out, and then kind of create an array to loop through them like we did in some other games. So that's it, and hope you have fun.